No, I think that's right. It's because one of the conditions I think for something, some object to have an essence or singularity is autonomy. I think that's part of the reason we're pulled to a lot of different things. When things have their own autonomy, then we can relate to them on an emotional level, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that those things as well.
Another thing that I only realized also through, I have to say, through speaking with Colin here in the shop, that maybe some of you have recognized this too. When you walk through here, there is a moment of how these things are positioned, that they, not 100%, but to a certain degree, you can add the rest of the body to it, in terms of the relations in the two. And so there is, if you take this one on the left here, and this one's a little bit higher up and also bigger, there is some kind of the rest of the presence of these portraits, which I really found concerning the horse space very, very welcome. And they really work for me. And the one moment where lately with Bart and worked for me for a second is with Guy's paintings, and here for example then something about the neutrality of the mouth and how it works for that one there too. The paint almost becomes sculptural there, and it's this one thing that draws me to it. And it seems to be quite a little bit also in combination with there's something strange about your eyes here. And not really there. And so in that sense how everything was put together, it was really working for me. And of course the mask, and I thought this morning about what we're going to speak about tonight, that this is probably the only one where, because the mask is never a portrait. The mask is something that covers, there's a portrait behind it. And I mean, there's a long history of how masks were used and just coming from other cultures and so on. But this is the only one where it's really something, somebody else maybe behind. But you can't see, but when we get as a portrait here, there's just a mask on top. And I found this was one very interesting thing too. And would you mind, because I found such a wonderful about cycling there, because it relates what you just said, there's this one moment when something becomes an artwork. And thinking, speaking about the falling man, said, would there be something that you could relate to? The idea of the photograph taken of the falling man, but it's 1 second, but suddenly something becomes.
Yeah. I was reading about this idea of improvisation and deciding not making a plan too well when you're starting out on an artwork, so there's room for stuff to happen in between. And I just went on to say, the press release discussed whether the act of painting portraits could be read as a process of becoming of the work rather than the model. But in view of the works in the show, this appearing seems strangely linked to a moment of sparseness. Guy's paintings, for example, are thick, but the final imagery quite thin. It's a layer that's quickly and without preciousness pasted over the working time that went before it. It seems that those traces of previous incarnations that are visible through the layers are less out of careful conservation than the want to put down the new idea quickly. So those certainly in products of their predecessors, at the last his images also give them the slip. Similarly, Gretscher's mask only gains its crucial expression by virtue of a quick tap in just the right place. I was reminded of my old art history teacher and how he used to show slides of Andy Warhol's electric chair or car crash screen prints. We used to discuss how this image delivered so much horror was only just there. It's a veil quickly applied in one easy stroke, again an extremely casual gesture. The image we read is just a series of pixels applied at a whim, but it's perhaps this closeness to not being there at all that makes it all the more present. In our art history lessons, we would compare these images to the famous photograph of the falling man. The man pictured mid-flight is a descendant without hearing this once loaded image, became something really different, an abstract or a new and simple almost. And I was just thinking about this in terms of Frost's moment of clarification, perhaps an image is a dot on the line or a recognition of something differentiating itself during the making process. So maybe it's about protecting this moment of sense before it falls back away again to the melting pot, before it becomes something else entirely. So I guess I was just thinking about the image of the falling man because it's like a really, really small man, and behind him is this World Trade Center towers. And it's like the figure of the man is really tiny, but that's what makes all the sense, that's what makes that word fit. And you know, without him, it's just something like open and abstract without all that. It just seemed very close to nothing, basically. Just take out the tiny figure and stuff. I was thinking about it in terms of, I guess it's just that process of making something, you know, that process of painting where you could just go on and on, but then at some point, sometimes, hopefully, something kind of clicks, and then it's not right, but, you know, if you kind of don't recognise that, or maybe it doesn't happen, you just, it could be not or a bad painting.
I think what's the interesting thing is because you spoke about the process of making. But I think one of the arguments of the show is also it's not about the process of making, but also how we see this. And then it works in similar way. There is a moment of suddenly something, there is something happening. So there's this time moment in the process of making things, but also how we are different with these. It's something that there seems to be this moment of pause.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think this is what was the difference between mine and yours maybe is because I was seeing it really like in terms of making and the making process, and you saw it from the other side in terms of when you look at a footprint and what and that kind of bit that you get from the viewer side. So we kind of have the two different angles, which I find quite interesting.
I missed that connection, sorry. Well, I approached Momentary. The way I approached it was obviously very analytically. So I posed it as a question in portraits, clarify anything for us. It says stay against confusion, but I interpreted that to be very broadly. So I guess mine was just A meets B, but yours was A between B and
So we're both talking about recognizing something, I think, but from
different angles.
I thought it was interesting.
Yeah. So in the process of the making, is it the artist is recognizing, or is it? I mean, it's because it's difficult for the viewer. Otherwise, we would have to read a lot into the images.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, definitely. I think I was just kind of thinking about like those pictures and how they're kind of. There's some really sort of important decisions going on there in terms of that's because some of them are really quite simple. But then that's the kind of recognition like, okay, that's not so you were talking about when you recognise the face and how you relate to it.
Especially lately, there's many people write about non-portraits. Because we've done a lot. We've tried every possible way to portray, for example, also photography, and we've tried every possible way to deconstruct everything. And so suddenly now there's portraits that don't tell us anything anymore. It's just completely empty. They're there, and they have the physical presence of something that we can recognize, but in the end of the day, we can't relate to anything in the emotionally or to that person anymore. So they're not portraits. There's no way that we somehow get to them. And that's why I thought, especially this discussion happening in photography, and then having this here in all sorts of different mediums, especially Matteo's monotype, which looks like a drawing and is and becomes also the way it's presented as taking out the sketchbook. But it's actually print. It's monotype meaning is also, it's a very single event. There's only this one that is like this, nobody else. So it's exactly these two things combined too. So the mechanical reproduction, at least as a technique, somehow as an allusion to it, or playing with drawing, and that moment of a single event. And so somehow this says something to me, and there's something happening. Maybe even more than in a photograph where I can completely recognize something. And that's why I find also so wonderful that and we both have very similar things. Good, well, I think maybe
You have to report on that.
gives you some ideas now how we came to these different texts. And maybe there's something that somebody wants to say, ask us, or say about the artists in general. So they have to chat afterwards.
I just think as a final point, the idea that I wanted to kind of make, that now that everyone kind of had their say, is that in portraiture, like what Robert Frost was trying to say, I think, is that he was describing what he does, right? He was describing his process of making. And the result of that is that we get to re-experience his process of making. We get to re-experience his process of finding one word at a time. So we get to retrace whatever that is, And I mean, and so like the idea that when I look at these things is that their making is very visible, I mean, these things that are, Andrzej's paintings and Guy's paintings are very clear about how they're made. And then in the fact of, by looking at them, there's a way of kind of slowing down how we're thinking about ourselves, and there's like this elongation about, this thing took a long time to make, but it's a very, as we kind of go through it, it kind of slows down, and it kind of takes us out of ourselves. And that is what a poem does, and I think that's what a painting does, if we kind of participate and think about the multitude of decisions that it takes to make one thing, while experiencing the thing itself. And so I think that holding those two things together is kind of what I was trying to compare between, poetry and painting. And that's why I kind of always want to kind of reference the two, because I think they kind of hold each other in balance in some ways. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming. If anyone has any questions, go ahead. But I think that this was wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Okay.